It's my privilege now to introduce our Trojan talk of the day from my really good friend, neighbor, colleague, Matt Kahn. I was talking about how fortunate we were to acquire Musa from Wisconsin. And we're even, well, not more fortunate in the sense of Matt, and we're equally fortunate to have Matt and Musa. But we got Matt to come 10 miles down the 10 freeway to join us. Because he knew that he would be in a much more hospitable environment at USC than that other place. Matt is probably the most highly regarded scholar who is looking at the intersection of climate change and urban economics. The way I'll describe Matt's, how profligate he is, prolific he is I read on average, I would guess about 2 books a month. I mean, I read a lot of other stuff, but I'm talking about like a book with a cover. And if I tried to read all of Matt's books, then I would read 1 book a month plus a book by Matt. I don't know how he does it, but he is constantly churning out really amazing stuff, including a book with our friend Siqi Zhang called Blue Skies Over Beijing, which will give you a flavor of the sort of stuff he's interested in. He's also a rare person in that he is very much a proudly trained University of Chicago economist. He refers to that. I don't think Matt can go 15 minutes without talking about that. But at the same time, he is absolutely convinced that climate change is an existential threat to us and that we need to deal with it. But from a market perspective, I think it's fair to say. And so I always find his remarks refreshing, even if I don't agree with every single one of them, and I think you will too. Matt Kahn, thank you for being with us this afternoon, or this morning.
Folks, good morning. No PowerPoint and some optimism, so I thought that, thank you and good night. Daryl's talk was great, and I'd like to pick up indirectly on some of his themes. I love being part of the Luss Center and what Richard and his colleagues are building at USC, that it's optimistic and problem-solving. Folks, I recognize that climate change might not be the first issue you have on the brain right now. I read the newspaper, and I thought there was a very candid discussion this morning. Wars around the world scare me. I'm a father. I'm thinking about the future. My optimism has been challenged, but I continue to be an optimist. And what I briefly, I think this is going to be about a 15-minute talk. Your time is valuable. I want to talk about the challenges and opportunities for multifamily housing posed by the climate change challenge. And folks, I'm going to focus, I'm not going to ask you whether you're vegetarians or how long you showered this morning. Tough room. What I want you to begin to think about is location, location, location. For the properties you already own, manage, are thinking of upgrading, if you're catering to the rich, the middle class, or the disadvantaged, what is on the horizon in regards to the physical risks of climate change? And we can read the biblical plagues of the heat, the pollution. I'm about to talk about all of this, and I'm going to use, my mother says not to wave my hands at people. My starting point, as Richard alluded to, is the old efficient markets hypothesis that the value of a piece of real estate, its resale value, is tied to its rental stream and its occupancy stream. As you think about the properties you're investing in and may invest in and that you're already managing, what risks are on the horizon? And folks, there's been some celebration of Southern California. Did you hear on the panel this morning that there is some love for Southern California and that congestion and traffic is actually a good thing? It suggests that people want to be there. Will climate change pose a threat to which cities, whether it's a Phoenix or a Miami or in Southern California, those cities, those neighborhoods, those properties that can adapt to risks that are on the horizon will have higher occupancy and greater resale value. And so folks, I am a believer in competition and a little bit of the Paul Revere effect. So let me speak about that. Think about properties. They could be in Riverside. They could be in many different parts of the region. What risks are on the horizon? How many of you have heard of First Street Foundation? a nonprofit in Brooklyn, which when I visit, I'm the least hip person there. Tough room. So First Street Foundation as a nonprofit, one can type in any residential address into their risk factor and find 5 dimensions of risk for every property. It's flood risk, it's fire risk, it's air pollution risk, and it's wind speed risk. And so what First Street Foundation is doing is it, for every property in the United States, is providing climate science scaled down to properties. Now, this is a model. You should not bet all your life savings on this model. But what their efforts are doing is transforming unknown unknowns into known unknowns. And so, an example, if you are managing a property which faces greater fire risk, you should anticipate in California that there's going to be less insurance coverage of those properties. As I look around the room, I'm looking to see, everyone's checking their phone. Hey, I believe in competition. As insurance rates rise, those who own properties in fire zones could face a retreat by insurers for these properties. I've debated others of whether private equity firms will move in because private equity firms can form a portfolio and hedge those risks. For if you own or manage multifamily housing in an area facing higher insurance rates, what precautions can you take to protect your property from future fires where fire risk comes from the combination of drought and extreme heat? As these risks emerge, there will be opportunities for entities that successfully adapt to these risks to have higher occupancies and to be able to rent at higher rents. An example, folks, many of you are used to Energy Star and LEED certified buildings. So does everyone know they're LEED certified? So at UCLA, where I used to teach, there was a shower in our building. There was a shower in our building because that got you extra points for LEED certified because you were more likely to take public transit if you had a shower. Folks, I was looking for a laugh. The shower nobody used, but that somehow got us points for the LEED certification. I am predicting that going forward, we're going to see a new LEED Energy Star certification industry who certifies which multifamily housing meets resilience criteria. One can be a resilient piece of real estate either because you're located in a terrific area that faces less God-given risk, or because you have taken precautions to upgrade your property that can be verified by an arm's length certifier. So sort of like Moody's and Standard & Poor's for climate risk. And folks, this is especially important for people in the room investing in affordable housing. We know after Hurricane Harvey in Houston that many disadvantaged people were living in areas in floodplains. Unfortunately, it's no accident where different people of different socioeconomic status live within cities. And so there's an environmental justice double bottom line aspect of people in this room using your investing prowess and access to capital to upgrade on this quality of life dimension. Of course, street safety matters. Of course, access to transit matters, access to good schools. But going forward, I believe there's going to be a growing premium for for helping people who live in multifamily housing, which I've lived in many cities, to enjoy their concept of the good life in the face of these emerging risks. So an idea that I want you thinking about is demand creates supply. With my undergraduates, I cracked the following true joke. I say, students, and you're supposed to say, yes, professor. Yes, professor. Tough room. I say, if I was the only bald man in the world, would there be Rogaine? And there's silence in the room as I have them look at my bald spot. And what I'm looking for is if enough of us face a challenge, capitalism steps up and innovates. If I was the only bald man, no drug company would bother to go through the fixed cost to design the product. And so as more real estate faces challenges and as investors anticipate these challenges, it actually helps to create a supply-side response. And this is capitalism at work. Folks, 2 final ideas before I wrap up. I want to do some freakonomics with you. Another challenge climate change is going to pose are these particulate matter spikes. Folks, did anyone enjoy the recent wildfires? I get terrible headaches from the smoke. And my wife turns to me and says, you're such a tough guy. You say we can adapt to anything, and here you are crying. I say, thank you, my beloved. Folks, there is the following very interesting work going on in economics, building on Steve Levitt's Freakonomics. Did you know that professional chess players make worse moves indoors when there's higher particulate levels outside? So you're supposed to say, that's interesting. Oh, you guys are sick of me. And so there's more and more of these papers being written by the nerds on what real estate, when it's very smoky outside, does this permeate the windows? Does this permeate the foundation of the real estate and affect the children? Children are very susceptible to pollution. My colleagues at USC Keck have documented the nasty synergy of heat and pollution on vulnerable populations. And so people are playing worse chess. Tennis players are playing worse tennis. We documented in China that judges take longer in trials to deliberate, even in air-conditioned rooms, when it's more polluted outside. And so as you think about your real estate, as PM 2.5 has gotten cheaper to monitor, there's new opportunities for you to measure this, to address environmental justice, and to think about if you took costly steps to offset this challenge, would you be rewarded in terms of lower occupancy and higher occupancy and higher rents? I'm losing it for your efforts to help your property adapt to the conditions it faces. Folks, I want to wrap up by telling you about a final paper of mine. And this made the national news. We had the opportunity to partner with Redfin. So how many of you are cruising the Redfin website right now to search for housing? Redfin, as you know, tells you how many bathrooms a home has, tells you the price and the zip code. In a partnership with First Street Foundation, a random set of people were exposed to data on what was the flood score for the properties they were looking at. So imagine if you were looking at Redfin and you're looking at Kim Kardashian's house, and all of a sudden you see the flood score for that house. It was not prominently labeled, it was just another piece of information next to the walk score. We found that people who previously had been searching in very high flood risk areas substituted, changed their behavior, and started to search for homes in safer areas. And folks, a final fact, we documented that searchers in red states and blue states were equally likely to respond to this information. So in the privacy of one's own life, we all want to be safe, to be healthy, and to raise children who flourish. And both Republicans and progressives responded to this information in private as they seek to be safer and to be educated consumers. So for those of you building multifamily right now, seeking your next set of tenants, whether these are young people who are very environmentally conscious, whether these are senior citizens worried and susceptible to their health, whether this is the disadvantaged who we know face the greatest challenges posed by climate change, each of these groups form a possible set of demanders seeking improved real estate performance in the face of climate change. So Richard alluded to my optimism. My optimism comes from my belief in competition. We educate consumers about the trade-offs they face in different multifamily housing alternatives. And this sets off a virtuous competition as you guys seek solutions to the very serious challenges we face. Richard, do we have time for any questions, or I should wrap it up? Folks, thank you.
Thank you for this really fun speech. So my question is, we see that the coastal line is eroding. We see major erosion within Malibu. The bedrock is falling away. And then along San Diego, they had to retool parts of the railroad because portions of the track also fell into the sea. So First Street Foundation, are they doing these scores for areas outside of the New York area?
The whole nation.
Oh, okay. So they've made it to California?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
And your question is very important because and this was not part of my remarks. My mother, who's a lawyer, says, Matthew, what are you writing on private-public partnerships? And so whether it's the Amtrak train connecting San Diego to LA, there's a crucial issue. If people in multifamily housing don't have cars, or if some of them don't, of access to good infrastructure, and the synergistic investments between infrastructure and the housing, I absolutely agree. First Street Foundation has a national perspective, and I asked them, could you expand to Bangladesh? Can we get the word out in developing countries about risk? And they quoted me a 7-figure price for doing that, and so I'm selling cookies. Because information is power. An educated consumer makes better decisions that they're less likely to regret. And that, on the supply side, gives you guys very strong incentives to do your homework here. Folks, I skipped one point in my notes. Los Angeles is going to get hotter outside of the coast, and electricity bills will rise for your properties. There's very interesting questions of, and I'd love to speak to you, are you up to date on the age of the systems built into your buildings? Of what would it cost to retrofit your existing air conditioning? What would it cost to just swap out the entire system? And do you engage in cooling using artificial air conditioning, or do you use tree coverage and other ecological solutions to offset the urban heat island effect? There's so many interesting issues without being a hippie for investigating how do you cost effectively deliver comfort in an increasingly risky world.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that? I just want to do a poll. How many of you own a income property? How many in the room own an income property? Okay. How many of you have on what you, keep your hands up please if you own one. How many of you separately meter each of your units in your property? Okay, most of you, that's good. I mean, one of the mysteries to me, I lived in a property managed by a very well-known REIT when I was working at Hutton in 2015 and 2016. And the apartments were not separately metered. We paid for electricity on a pro rata basis based on the square feet that we consumed, which seemed just so dumb to me because then there's no incentive, right, to save on electricity. And I looked at the cost of metering, and I just didn't understand why such a sophisticated company, and because I own some stock in this company, I'm not going to name it, wouldn't do this very simple thing. And I know, Matt, you've done great work on metering and incentive pricing of water and electricity, and it really matters a lot.
I agree. So my colleague Frank Wallach at Stanford has documented that when people are signed up for dynamic pricing, they both demand curves slope down, as you remember from your favorite classes, and if you face the marginal cost of consumption of water and electricity, you're more likely to install those durables, the low flush toilets and the energy efficient durables. Guys, a final point there. Niels Koch, my co-author in Holland, did you know that in Holland they give a report card for every building, A, B, C? And those buildings in Holland that are the most energy efficient, they rent and sell for a price premium. So when consumers are informed about the operating costs they'll face, either if they're zero because the owner is bearing those costs, or if they are what they are, if the costs are decentralized to the tenant, when prospective tenants are aware that the building they're considering moving into has high operating costs, they're going to demand a rent discount. And that incentivizes you to provide energy and water efficiency. And that helps us in aggregate to adapt to climate change.
Do you have any policy recommendations to encourage this virtuous competition cycle you discussed, or is it something we should all chase on our own?
So this is an excellent question. Folks, I am not an optimist that carbon taxes are coming. And so many economists, including myself, support a carbon tax. But it has been difficult to phase in because it lowers poor people's purchasing power. So in the absence of a carbon tax, I think that I support President Biden's push the Inflation Reduction Act encourages all this innovative investment. So there's all these researchers at Viterbi and other engineering programs researching the green economy in part because of Biden's subsidies. But on the ground, I'd say it like this, as the Los Angeles economy, if we were to build more housing, that new housing would be cutting edge technology. and also a permitting process that encourages retrofits, because so much of the housing stock, of course, is old. I'm a 57-year-old piece of equipment, and I need to be retrofitted. And so I didn't directly answer your question because economists say, well, what are the benefits and what are the costs? It's very difficult to think about. I'm going to wimp out there. I'm going to be a two-handed economist. In the absence of a carbon tax, economists have been fighting each other over what are second-best policies here. And I would love to speak one-on-one with you about that.
Okay, Matt Kahn, thank you very much for joining us today.